The transfer process explained. So first of all, is the foundation of any transaction is the offer to purchase. Hereby is to be remembered that the offer to purchase is to be duly completed, like it should stipulate the who, what, where, and when. So it should be duly dated, both the seller and purchaser is to sign. All the details, figure-related details of the seller and the purchasers is to be reflected on the offer to purchase, like the full names, ID numbers, domicilium, and contact details. This is to ensure that the transferring attorneys obtaining the instruction will have the ability to immediately effect to the transaction process and duly open it on their system. Next step is the instruction is forwarded to the transferring attorneys. Should the PRO team not be able to attend or assist you in the matter that you require, you're more than welcome to contact our conveyancers directly, Mr. Vermeulen and Mrs. Botha directly, with their cell phone numbers reflected below. What's the next step? So now is the method of payment. So the method of payment can be either it can be a deposit payable, cash deal, or a bond grant that is to be obtained by the purchaser. Now the attorneys request the following. First of all is we request the relevant figure documentation, identity document or a passport if they do not have a valid South African document. What is important to note is that we require the date of birth of the seller or the purchaser in the event that they only have a passport. Marriage certificate or any other means of certificate should they be married in terms of a foreign marriage. If they're married out of community or property, we need a copy of the antenuptial agreement, proof of residence, and tax income number. When no bond is registered over the property or previous cancelled, we request the original title deed. This can either be requested from the bank or the client. Please take note if we are unable to obtain the original title deed, a separate application, a Regulation 68 application, is to be done, also known as a VA application, whereby we request a certified copy of the title deed. Okay, requesting by the attorneys. If a bond is registered over the property, we request the settlement figures from the bank, also known as the cancellation figures, to know what payments are still due and payable to the bank in regard to the bond repayments. These figures will only be valid for a certain period. If the time prescribes and the MIT has not been lodged prior to that, then we will have to re-request these figures. Important thing to note is that you must always advise your seller that on a request of cancellation figures, they are still to keep their current bond up to date. Failure to provide the above mentioned, like the figure, etc., will cause possible delays in the transaction itself. So what do we request now? Local authority. So this is we request the rate figures from council, which is usually payable in advance by the seller 2-3 months as determined from council to council. Most in practice we found that the agents do not advise the sellers that they will be responsible for the payments of such. Payment of figures, local authority to provide us with a clearance certificate. This document is to be included to the registration documents once we lodge it in the deeds office. Managing agents. In the case where you have a homeowners association or a sectional title scheme, we do the same as with the cancellation of the council's figures. We request the figures from the body corporate or the managing agents. We also obtain a levy clearance certificate, but it's no need to lodge the certificate with the registration documents. Our conveyancer certificate will make note or make provision for same. When dealing with a homeowners association, consent from the sale is also requested from the levy figures. Most of all, it is determined in a title deed, but in practice we usually do this to ensure that we comply with all requirements. Okay, the next step, payment of the purchase price. Like I earlier said, this can be either via cash, so if the purchase price has been received, or the purchaser obtained his bond grant as stipulated in the offer to purchase. Now, the transferring attorneys will be, as all the suspensive conditions has been met, now the attorneys will be able to draft the relevant transfer documents and then contact the seller and the purchaser to come and sign the transfer documents. Once the transfer documents has been signed, the next step is that the purchaser is to pay the transfer costs. On payment of the transfer costs, we forwarded our request to the bond attorneys for guarantees. So the bond attorneys is to issue us with guarantees that either our transfer costs will be paid in full as well as the full and final settlement of the purchase price. Now the purchaser has to sign the bond documents at the bond attorney. So please take note that there's always, if there is a bond grant applicable, there will be two attorneys present. It will be your transfer attorneys attending to the transfer of the movable property, as well as the bond attorneys to see to the registration of the bond over the property. In the event that the seller had a bond registered over his property, there will be a third attorney present, which is known as the bond cancellation attorneys. Now we're tying up the loose ends. So we receive the guarantees from our bond attorneys and forward same to the cancellation attorneys for the settlement of the current bond over the seller's property, like I mentioned previously. As mentioned before, we requested the rates figures. Now we attend to the payment of the rates figures, which is payable in advance to 3 months as determined by council, and they issue us with a rate clearance certificate. SARS, the big man. So on all the transactions, we must explain to SARS who's the seller, who's the purchaser, property description, and the purchase price, because they need to determine if the purchaser will be liable for the payment of transfer duty. Transfer duty is payable where the purchase price exceeds the value of 1 million rand. They have a specific calculation that they determine. It can be seen on the SARS website on how they determine the transfer duty. Even in the event that no transfer duty is payable, we still need to lodge the signed SARS documents as signed by the seller and the purchaser to obtain a transfer duty exemption certificate, just to say that the purchaser is not liable for any transfer duty. Now the seller is to provide us with the following. We also seen on previous transactions that the seller is not advised of same, that an electrical compliance certificate not older than 2 years or younger, if the offer to purchase makes mention thereof, is to be provided for the said property. In the event that there is gas or electric fence over the property, they are also to provide us with such certificates. We're almost there, guys. Next is obtain proceed to lodge. So the bank, the bond attorneys will request from the bank. They will lodge all their documents and ask them for a proceed to lodge. Once we've obtained the proceed to lodge, all respective attorneys liaise with each other. So for simultaneous lodgement. So this means is the cancellation attorneys, the transferring attorneys, as well as the bond registration attorneys, they correspond with each other so that everything gets lodged simultaneously in a deeds office to ensure that everything happens simultaneously. The cancellation of the seller's bond, transfer from the seller to the purchaser, as well as the bond registration over the property the purchaser is purchasing. Now we wait. Once we have lodged the documents in the deeds office, they usually take 7 to 15 working days for the documents to reach their final stage. So at Butterkoppel, we will advise the clients on the process of the deeds office. So we will do regular checks, searches in the deeds office to see how far the transaction is. Please take note that the Pretoria deeds office takes a little bit longer than Joburg. So the deeds office procedure is the documents are examined and then they are prepared. And once it is on preparation, or we call it as prep, then within 5 to 7 working days, it will register in the deeds office. So once it has been registered, good, congratulations, you're officially the new owner. The property gets registered into the name of the purchaser. What happens then, everything simultaneously happens, is that the seller's bond gets cancelled. Guarantees, which was issued by the bond attorneys, gets requested for payment. And that's it, guys. Thank you so much for your time. Should you have any further queries, please feel free to contact us at any time. Contact details are below.